Washington needs to find a way to manage some major injuries against Purdue.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers out there today. We're going to talk some 2026 recruiting class as Washington looks to put a few finishing touches, including a 4-star offensive tackle who's going to be visiting this weekend. We're going to talk about the defense, which got overshadowed by the offense's really lackluster day, but I like where that unit is heading. We got to start on the offensive side because Washington had injuries to 4 major starters: Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston, Azzopardi, and Landen Hatchet. And I look at this game against Purdue, and I'm really curious to see, even if let's just say 2 of them can't play, how Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff can scheme around that and bounce back.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued for 2 of those 4, and it's no slight to Denzel Boston, but I think you can live without Denzel against a 2-8 winless in the Big Ten Purdue. I don't know how that's going to go if you're playing without Jonah Coleman and Azzopardi. I think given that Landen Hatchet's injury sounded like it happened against Illinois, and they've been kind of figuring it out since then. Obviously, if he can play against Wisconsin, even at some level, and then with Zach Henning obviously getting some time there as well, you can live with that. But Azzopardi, when you look at that right tackle situation, Paki Finau, by the way, did a solid, admirable job. Like passing grades-ish. I mean, not according to the PFF, but could get a job done if you need to, certainly against Purdue.
For somebody who didn't take any reps at the position until that game, I think that'll all work itself out. I have more thoughts, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Exactly. And Jedd said as much on Monday when, they only had about 5 minutes to figure out who was going to go in and who they're credited. They gave Swanee Pasolo a shot, and then that was it. I think they pulled the plug on that pretty quickly, rightly so. The other concern that I have is Adam Mohammed showed well against Wisconsin, but Adam Mohammed can't do it alone just yet. And that includes Dezmen Williams, where I think, Demon's going to obviously play a factor in the ground game as well. And I like Adam Mohammed, next year and beyond. But to me, without Jonah Coleman, the threat of Jonah Coleman more so than anything else, as we've seen teams want to stack the box and really defend against that run. If you don't have Jonah Coleman and Azzopardi, yikes, I feel a lot less happy.
So I see where you're going with that. I look at this Purdue defense, which is 15th in the Big Ten, allowing 161.5 yards per game on the ground. And I'm interested to see what a plan of attack would be if Jonah can't suit up. Jedd did say they're just going to give him a lot of treatment this week and see what that looks like as the days go by. I think Azzopardi is the one I'm most concerned about missing this game. And as Jedd said on Monday, there are a lot of options to stand in for Drew at right tackle, whether it be Paki Finau, whether it be Champ Talialia or John Mills, who are other names that he threw out there. Swanee Pasolo being the 4th one in the mix. I'm curious to see what that might look like, especially after Maximus McCree suffered the foot injury at Michigan. So there's a lot to just kind of digest there. I look at what Adam did against Wisconsin, and I think that I'd be intrigued to see him get more run because we know what the plan is for him moving forward, right? And it's one of those games where it's obviously unfortunate if Jonah can't suit up, but it's one of those games that can give you a glimpse into the future of what a 2026 backfield could look like with Adam and Dezmen. And then Jordan Washington was out for this game and didn't make the trip due to an illness. So it sounds like he might be back. That's one to keep an eye on as well, or maybe that's a guy who gets a couple more touches under his belt in a game like this. So I'm curious to see what that looks like too. The one that I am most intrigued by, because Landen Hatchet, the thing there too, is, as Jedd told us on Monday, is he hurt his hand against Illinois, was in a ball cast, so he had to snap with his left hand. And they're going to try changing out some different hand guards to see what might be able to work best for him and see what that could look like. It's Denzel Boston, and it's not relatively close for me. And the reason I say that is I look at this wide receiver room around him, and we see the talent, right? We've seen what Dezmen Roebuck has done this year. We've seen Raiden Vines-Bright start to put it all together. We've seen Omari Evans in spurts. We've seen Chris Lawson in spurts. And in a game like this, it's a lot like it is in the backfield where you just get a much deeper glimpse into what the passing game could look like moving forward. Obviously, there's guys like Mason James coming in and the transfer portal as well. There's still a lot to consider there, but I think it's just going to be a much better look at what the offense might look like moving forward, especially with Rasheed Williams out for the year. And I would say that that's where more of my, I would say concerns lie right now. And a lot of that is just because what Denzel has done in this offense. That guy was playing at an all-American caliber level, a first-round draft pick sort of level. And again, it's not to take anything away from Jonah, who is stellar and is going to be a day 2 pick at worst in this upcoming draft. I think it just says more about that guy was just so clearly the anchor of the wide receiver room. And as Dezmen has continued to develop as a runner this year, Jonah has still been the primary focus of all defenses, but Denzel has been a guy where, unless, outside of the Ohio State game for the most part, and Michigan too, there just was not any kind of answer for him.
And that's a very good point. And like I said, it's not to discredit Denzel or say anything, because you're making all the great points that I would make pro Denzel. It's just, for me, I think Dezmen's ability and understanding with this offense, with respect to your opponent, again, if you're facing a Michigan or even a Wisconsin, for example, going into that game, if you don't have Denzel, I feel like Wisconsin's probably favored in that matchup just going into that game. But against a team like Purdue, who, there's probably some nice pieces on there. Jedd mentioned, I think, 15 of the 22 starters are new guys or something like that. So you're talking about an overhaul roster there, not a ton of overall talent there compared to what we've seen in the Big Ten. So for me, it's Dezmen's ability to level up with the guys that he's going to have for 26, 27 at least. I feel more confident in that coming to fruition than I do playing without Jonah, just because of, like you talked on, the teams keying in on Jonah has been the key to everything this season. That has been, we've seen that, from basically since the Ohio State game, the teams are keying in on Jonah Coleman to stop him, and then you just figure everything out from there. If you don't have Jonah or even the threat of Jonah, obviously, like Greg Schiano shouted out Adam Mohammed in his pregame press conference and things like that. But we haven't seen a ton of coaches talk about, hey, watch out for Adam Mohammed, like we have with Jonah. To your credit, like we have with Denzel, as I'm trying to think of Barry Odom there. I never said Brian on there, but it talks about
my family.
Right, exactly. I mean, we'll touch on that later on this week, I'm sure. But you just look at what Jonah brings and what he represents. Like I've said it from day one. Jonah is the heartbeat of this offense. Dezmen might be the catalyst, the guy driving the machine, doing all that. But if you don't have Jonah, and then you throw in, you don't have Drew Azzopardi, and you're rolling with either one of Solani or Paki, or I have reservations about Champ Taylor playing in this game, because this would be his second game of the season. So I don't really see that happening. But, Jedd did touch on the fact that he did play some tackle in high school, so that makes sense. I feel good about John Mills. And then if you put Paki at left guard or figure that out,
that is what happens.
And that, to me, I would feel much more confident about. And then when you decide between Denzel and Jonah, I could go either or there. If that's the solution, then I can go either or, where if you lose Jonah but you have Denzel, great. If you have Jonah but don't have Denzel, okay, you can still make that work because of what we've seen from Raiden. And then also throw in the tight ends with Decker and Quentin Moore. Like, you have enough pieces against Purdue to come out with a win. And I know I say that given I said the exact same thing about Wisconsin.
Yeah, but the biggest difference in that is this game is at home, where Washington has played very well and only lost one game in the Jedd Fisch era. So I think that is something to consider in all of this as well. But the biggest thing that I'll say for Adam here before we move on is we saw him play really well and just really take that step forward that I know some people in this fan base were looking for from him is, all right, what's he going to do when all of a sudden he does have to shoulder a bigger portion of the workload? And I was really impressed with what I saw from him. We've seen the athleticism, we've seen the burst, and now it's about continuing to develop his vision, his ability to run between the tackles. And I think those are all continuing to move forward. And it's kind of a lot like what we saw from Jonah as a sophomore at Arizona, where as he got a bigger workload and more of that responsibility fell on him when other guys in that room got hurt, all of a sudden he needed to step up and do more. And I think that's what we're going to see from Adam. I'm really impressed with it. And this defense from Purdue, again, this is why I think that this is kind of the game where it's okay. You can try to find a way to make it work. It's 15th in the Big Ten in scoring defense and 17th in total defense. So there are yards to be had, but now it's on the coaching staff to figure out a solid game plan to make sure that you can take advantage of that. But let's switch sides of the ball here, because I think the defense had a solid enough day, especially later on, but it certainly got overshadowed by Washington's poor performance on offense. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, with their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House's next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Dewar. I'm so excited about these new jeans I just got in this weekend. I can't wait to rock them this weekend against Purdue as well. I've heard the most amazing things about them, and it's so much fun to talk about Dewar, because for me, I'm a guy who I grew up playing baseball. I've got big legs, and Dewar, their jeans have 5 times the stretch of traditional denim, making so much easier to fit, and they're antibacterial, meaning your jeans stay fresh longer so you can wear more and wash less. And Dewar jeans, they also feel stretchy without looking stretchy. They combine classic jeanswear style with the kind of comfort and performance you get from athletic wear. It really is the best of both worlds. Designed to look great and stay comfortable all day, no matter what you're doing. Simply put, Dewar makes the world's most comfortable pants without having to sacrifice style. Trust me, once you try these, they'll be your go-to. Get a pair for yourself or as an amazing holiday gift. Go now to shopdewar.com/LockedOnSeattle. You'll get 15% off your first order. That's shopdewar.com/LockedOnSeattle for 15% off. One more time, shopdewar.com/LockedOnSeattle. Lars, as we switch sides here, I am concerned, just to stay on the injury front here for 10 seconds, about the status of Rashawn Clark. Jedd Fisch shared with us on Monday that he suffered a hyperextended knee on that one punt return he did take after Denzel Boston went out of the game. And this is a situation where I'm curious to see what the plan might be to replace him if he's unable to go, whether it be Leroy Bryant, whether we see some more Dylan Robinson in this game. I'm curious to see what that looked like. But to segue that into an overall performance, Washington's defense, after getting blown off the ball, not looking that great, allowing 120 yards on the ground in the first half, really showed up in the second, allowed just 37 yards on the ground, 1.9 yards per carry. And I asked Ryan Walters about that on Tuesday. And one of the things that he said was, a lot like we've seen several times now this year, teams have gone in and just completely changed up their offensive style against us and shown and just done a bunch of things that we didn't see on film. And credit to him, like truly credit to him and that entire unit for shoring up, seeing it a few times, and being able to figure it out as the game went along, because they kept Washington in that game. They did a great job of that. And as we look at these next couple of weeks down the stretch, I'm curious to see if they can keep that momentum up against this Purdue team.
Yeah, and I just wonder, I guess, can those adjustments come earlier in the game? Can they come before halftime? Now, again, worth noting for casual fans or people that don't really know a ton about football, it is hard to make those adjustments on the fly, drive by drive. You look in the NFL, even teams struggle doing that. So it's worth just kind of pointing that out. But if you have a sense that a team is going to do that, now you look at Purdue, it's pretty kind of basic here. When you look at their offense, they don't have their leading rusher for the rest of the season. There's not a ton there to threaten you. There's Hudson Carr's not there anymore. You look at, just the Purdue teams of old, Drew Brees is not there, all those types of things. So you should be able to have a better semblance of what you're going to get. But having said that, I'm just wondering, like, what can Ryan Walters and the staff do to either circumvent that? Because you're not going to be able to prevent a team from prepping completely differently. That's just going to come, and that's honestly a credit to Washington and the staff, because most teams you would think just would run their offense and we'll just try and maybe add a couple things here and there. The fact that teams have to switch up a lot against Washington says a lot. But to me, it's okay. You didn't expect to have Caleb Smith come in. I think it's the Wisconsin quarterback, the true freshman, played his first. Carter Smith, thank you. Made his Wisconsin debut in that game. So you weren't expecting that per se. And
So to Ryan Walters' credit, he said that they got wind that was going to happen. And that was one of the things that they kind of game planned for, was 2 mobile quarterbacks in him and Danny O'Neal. But I think it was more so exactly what they ran with some of the triple option stuff is what they were like, oh, this is somewhat new.
Exactly. And I think so you might have a semblance of what's coming, but still, I think, there's just got to be a way for which, I don't know if they make the game plan better in terms of overall just coming into the game with, 2 or 3 different options, Or is it a matter of we just need different personnel groupings? Because the other thing that you pointed out there, if Rashawn Clark's not able to go, Dylan Robinson, I believe, was questionable on the injury report. So that is another thing to kind of monitor there. And from what we've seen from Leroy Bryant, I don't necessarily know how confident I would be. But this all stems from this is, I guess, your get-right game of get-right games. But you also have, to be fair, UCLA on the road. So who knows what that's even going to look like. But this is the perfect game where Ryan Walters should be able to come in and assert himself. The ironic part about all of this is the last time Barry Odom and Ryan Walters faced each other, the combined score was 98 points. So how much defense will be played in this game? So you're way back in the day, right? Yeah. But with that being said, just there's something in me that says, Ryan Walters can scheme something up to where you're feeling pretty good about this game coming out of it. And it could also be not a repeat of the Wisconsin game, but just a semi-Illinois, semi-Wisconsin game of, hey, we might actually see the 30s and 40s in this game.
So I see where you're going with that. I look at this secondary especially, and Wisconsin is an outlier in terms of their inability to throw the ball this season, which is one of many, 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 many reasons that loss is so frustrating, is that they had 48 yards through the air. And well, yes, part of that is due to their own inefficiencies on that side of the ball. Some of that has to be credit to Washington's really talented group in the secondary, where Alex McLaughlin continues to look like a star and continues to look like one of the best transfer portal acquisitions for any team in the Big Ten over the course of this last cycle. And along with Tacario Davis, who has done exactly what I know this coaching staff hoped he would, where Ephesians Prysock has certainly shown improvement, as we've talked about a lot, whatever the nickel position does look like, if Rashawn Clark is unable to go, whether it be Leroy Bryant, whether we see more Dylan Robinson, because Dylan Robinson did play in that game. You're right that he was questionable, but I did see him out there for a little bit. And I look at the secondary, whether it be Ryland or Allen. We'll see if McAllister is able to suit up. It said Jedd Fisch said it sounds like he's on track to play. So there's still a lot of talent on the back end of this defense. And I can't help but feel very confident in that group, because I have all season. And there have certainly been times where it didn't look the best. You look at that Washington State game. You look at a couple other games this year where, yeah, the secondary did not play up to the level of talent that it has in that unit. But I look at what that unit can do when it's at its best. And as we've seen it continue to improve over these last couple of weeks, where they held Luke Altmaier, one of the better passers in the Big Ten, to under 200 yards and picked him off twice for the first time this season. There's still a lot to like about that unit. And I feel good with where they are coming into this game.
That's fair. And I think when you look at Ryan Brown, the Purdue quarterback, he's 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, so prone to turnovers, but also not really prone to kind of do a whole lot, if you think about it. And I think that's something that I look at in this game, where can Washington finally get that bulk turnover like they did against Illinois, where you have 2-3 turnovers in the game. That might be a significant difference, because if you're in that Wisconsin mold more so than anything else, so we're just punting back and forth and we're playing field position, Jack McAllister is on Purdue. So he's actually one of the better. Shout out Jack. Ended up in that whole period at Purdue, West Lafayette. That's something I'm not as confident in. Jedd, as he touched on, I bring this up in the defense with respect to the defense, because if this becomes a field position game, you're going to have to force a couple of turnovers in this game. And like you mentioned, you have the better secondary of the two, but we've seen them have the better defense and yet not get those turnovers like they should.
So I agree, because that's what we saw this weekend against Wisconsin, where the ball was out on the ground a couple of times. I think Jedd Fisch said 4, and you weren't able to recover any of those. That's one thing. But something that should be noted as you bring that up is Wisconsin and Purdue are tied for the most interceptions thrown with 10 in the Big Ten this season. And this is one thing that I've been pointing out, and I pointed out last week, and obviously the weather played a factor in this. And as that game continued to go and Wisconsin's defensive line really was able to dominate in that game, you weren't able to see as much of it. But you have an opportunity where you're 16.5 point favorites on FanDuel. Shout out to FanDuel. You have a great opportunity to get into a positive game script this weekend. And like we've talked about, this team just operates differently at home compared to on the road for, whatever reason you might want to point to. And I'll leave that up to all the everydayers out there for their own interpretation of it, because it's different for everybody. But I look at that and say, if you are able to start fast, which we'll talk about on the Friday show, but if you're able to start fast and you're able to get up by, let's just say 10-0 at some point in this game and force Purdue to throw the ball, I just feel very comfortable with where that unit is in that department.
I just found it funny that you said 10-0 because I'm just a random note here. In that game that Ryan Walters and Brian Odom faced each other, both Arkansas and Missouri had 10-point leads in that game, and Missouri ended up coming back to win that game. So I just thought it was kind of funny that you hit the nail on the number with 10 because I'm not sure a 10-point lead would be safe for some of these guys, but I do agree with the overall assessment of if you can get ahead early, you have enough talent to keep Purdue down. But it also does just kind of that record at home is so perfect that with coming off the Wisconsin game, anything can happen. You just really, I almost say like 21, 24-point lead. Like that's where I'd actually start to feel comfortable.
So let's talk about some of the guys that are going to be on campus taking this game in. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we look at the 2026 class, and we've talked a lot about, guys like Carter Gooden, the UCLA commit on the defensive line, who Washington is absolutely trying to get on campus for an official visit. Somebody like J.D. Hill, who I mentioned on a show earlier this week, as the Everdares know, the Mission Viejo defensive lineman, who's a really nice athlete. Right now, there's only one official visit scheduled for this Friday for Washington, and that's 4-star offensive tackle and Penn State commit Marlen Bright, who I really like this kid at 6'6", 280, 285 pounds, according to his dad on Twitter. Shout out to him. I think that this kid is one of those kinds of prospects where if Washington is able to flip him from Penn State, not only is that a really nice Big Ten win where he plays with 4-star quarterback commit Derek Zammit at DePaul Catholic High School in New Jersey, it's also one of those where you're continuing to do exactly what Jedd Fisch talked about on Monday. It's continuing to add the necessary size and length and strength and all those things needed to compete in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And worth noting, the other school kind of in the mix here is Illinois, who Washington beat in between when the interest started coming from Washington.
Yeah.
And, when the game happened against Illinois. So for me, it's a good opportunity for Washington to show kind of what they offer, because obviously with Derek Zammit, quarterbacks are going to flock to Jedd Fisch, like, fish and water and things like that. But Washington being able to go all the way to the East Coast, like you're kind of talking about with Carter Gooden, going to Massachusetts to get a edge rusher, defensive lineman, that is a massive, statement for Jedd Fisch if they're able to pull it off. And I do know for a fact, like the family wanted to get out before this game. This isn't just a, hey, where's the Zammits are coming out, so we just thought, playoffs are over. We're just going to come out and check it out, see what things are like out here. No, they have significant interest in Washington, but he is coming off a visit to Penn State. And I think the interesting thing for me in all of that is going to be, does he end up signing early? Or does he consider, when Penn State makes their head coaching decision, which, that decision's got to be coming here in the near future before Thanksgiving. It should. I say should, not will. I'm not a Penn State insider here, but at the same point, if that thing drags out, I could easily see this weekend making a strong enough impression where maybe the family does want to decide early and it ends up being Washington.
So I agree with you there. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this too, is that is something to note here, because personally, I don't think that decision is coming by early signing day. And I think that's just kind of playing out all your options. I've heard a name here, I've heard a name there. I'm not going to, throw anything out and speculate, but that's just something I'm really curious about as it pertains to that particular coaching search, because I think it's one of those things where it's an interesting just kind of tidbit in the world of recruiting now, where especially the transfer portal, it's, hey, we're going to wait 5 days to open that window until after a coach is hired so you can meet him and do all those different things. And I'm curious to see if that is, because I'm not going to speak for anybody here, if that's what the family's process is. And that's a really important part of this, because I still think that no matter what, it's good on Washington for being able to set up this visit and make it all happen. And like you said, there is legitimate interest from Marlen Bright, from that family, to come out here and see what Washington did. They took an official visit to Stanford before making the Penn State decision as well. So it doesn't seem like they have any reservations about, stepping out of their comfort zone and going East Coast to West Coast. And I think that's an important part of this too, because this is just one of those guys who he would be the cherry on top of what is a very solid offensive line class already. And I just look at it where I want to go back to something that Jedd Fisch said on Monday when I asked him about what he learned from this loss at Wisconsin. And one of the things he told me was you look at all these rosters when you play some of these teams that we haven't before in the Big Ten, and you look at the middle. You look at the safeties, linebackers, defensive linemen, offensive guards, centers, running backs, tight ends, and you look at the size and the length. And this is one of those guys with Marlen Bright at 6'6", 285. You combine that with Adiong Yang, with Dominic Harris. We know Cody Green is a true tackle, so I'm going to just put him in a separate boat for this. And all of a sudden, these guys are all gigantic and exactly what you're looking for to play on the interior, or like I think Marlen Bright has the feet and the athleticism necessary to play tackle as well. And as does Dominic Harris, let me be clear. But I look at both those guys, and all of a sudden, as you continue to try to beef up, we've seen John Mills at 6'6", 340 play on the interior this year. And as you just continue to try to build out a true Big Ten roster, these are the kinds of guys you need and the kinds of battles you need to win to move forward. Because if you win this in year 2, right, on top of Derek Zammit being from New Jersey, on top of some of these other guys that you've been able to pull in from outside of Washington's traditional footprint, like Mason James from Oklahoma, it's just a message that, hey, we're not just going out there and spending these resources to say we're trying to step out of our footprint. No, you're getting blue chip caliber prospects from outside of your traditional footprint. And that's good news because you can continue to do that moving forward. And as it pertains to a very important prospect in Carter Gooden, it's still, I'd like to see them get him on campus before we really take that conversation a lot further. But it's just proving, we're able to get guys from all over the country. And he's another guy who right now being committed to UCLA is clearly not afraid to step outside of his comfort zone. So it's just something that you can message to more and more recruits across the country that, hey, we're building something here at Washington, and we're, it doesn't matter where you're from. This is going to be a spot for you.
Yeah, you have to go where the talent is. And in traditional Washington previous coaching staff, they haven't done that. And that's no shot at Chris Peterson. I don't want to go back to the Sark
I think they
days.
tried. I just think they weren't good at it, to be honest.
Yeah, again, that's it. Like I said, I didn't want to take a shot because Pete.
No, it's difficult. It's very difficult.
It is, and I think Jedd is proving that there's other schools that are still going to make that run. I mean, you're talking about Washington beat out Alabama, UNC, and a couple of others for Derek Zammit. Make that clear. UNC was in the mix as well late in the process, for Derek. But when you're talking about competing year in and year out of the Big Ten, you have to go where the talent is. Like we talk about with the defensive line. They don't grow on trees. They don't, this isn't like, fresh sod that you can go buy anywhere. You have to really go and find it. And sometimes it's in Texas. Sometimes it's in Georgia and Alabama. Sometimes it's in New England.
Colorado.
Exactly. And I think no matter where it is, the fact that Jedd's message will sell anywhere. And if you win, winning sells anywhere. Like that's the other thing here. And the fact that he's been able to win in year 2 and what he did with his track record at Arizona in year 3, that leads me to believe that message being sold to 26 and potentially 27 recruits as well is, hey, we're right on the cusp. We got Damon for 1 more, 2 more years potentially. Like everything is all right there. And, anytime you have those building blocks already on your roster and you're just trying to stack more and more chips, to me, that's just it's easier to gravitate towards for recruits. Whereas last year, you're not able to get in on some of those mix of recruits because you're 6-6, 5-7, and you don't have that ability to sell that.
And there was so much roster turnover as well. It was like, oh, what does this look like? What does that look like? I think that's fair too. One guy who we also just kind of need to mention is who I think is just by far the most important prospect remaining on Washington's board right now. As I talked about the answer Jedd Fisch gave at his press conference yesterday about size and length and speed and athleticism. It's Ramzak Fruean, 3-star linebacker from Bethel High School. This is a guy who I still really like where Washington sits with him as of right now. And it's just one of those situations where hearing Jedd talk about that position at linebacker the way he did, and hearing how the coaching staff and the players, listening to X3 Alexander talk about Zadrius Rainey-Saleh today as we record this on Tuesday, I love hearing all that sort of stuff because it is just continuing to go out there and find these rare body types and these rare traits and trying to develop them. That's a really important part of recruiting on top of, going out and finding someone who is already a highly developed prospect in a 5-star offensive tackle in Cody Green, being able to win those battles as well. Because I look at Ramzak and I look at just kind of what he brings to the table and what we've seen, as Jedd Fisch mentioned, in this last loss in Wisconsin, look at a guy like Mason Posa in a very similar, just kind of athletic frame, a four-time state wrestling champion in New Mexico, getting those kinds of rare athletes where Ramzak is listed at 6'4", 215 pounds. They understand that getting those kinds of bodies through the door is what it takes to win.
Yeah, you can never neglect the home state. And it makes me think back, it's not similar body types and things like that, but just guys that maybe might fly under the radar on a few other programs lists, especially in the Big Ten. Alfonso Chupachala, when he committed to Washington way back when, where other schools like USC and others were pushing for him late in the process, but he ended up sticking with Washington. You never neglect the state. I think that's something that Jedd has learned from day one, where, you're going to need to go out of the state, go out to New Jersey, go out to Alabama to get Caleb Smith and things like that. But you always have to make sure you shore up the state, because whether it's Zadrius as the 4-star number 1 player in the state, or Ramzak, which I think he's what, 4-3, somewhere in that ballpark. And again, I'm not saying he's like 7, 8, 9 way down there, or Dominic Macon from Oregon, where you're again state wrestling, and Omar Khan similar in that background, where anytime you can stack the athletes in your neck of the woods, you take that 10 out of 10 times.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things with Ramzak is the positional versatility. The overall athleticism, where he probably would just wind up at floating between inside and outside linebacker, and just seeing how that's worked out so far for X3 Alexander. Seeing just what the plans are for Zadrius Rainey-Saleh, what those plans could look like for Donovan Robinson in a year, in 2 years. There are so many guys that already fit that body type, and this coaching staff has done a really good job of getting them in the door. And now it's a matter of stacking that, building on it, finding more of it, and just continuing to take this to the next level. And I'm really curious to see how that's going to work out with the rest of this 2026 class. But Lars, that's all we got for today. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers out there for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.